Hello, my name's Riggs, and I built a really, really bad pedal board. So about 6 months ago, I kind of changed my setup, and I just kind of threw everything together on a board that I already had. I didn't really plan it out. I just kind of knew what I wanted the signal flow to look like. Thought about it for probably about 30 minutes and then just started applying dual lock and zip tying cables down just to kind of make it work. So now I'm living with the repercussions of that, and I have a really, really terrible pedal board. It just doesn't function super well. I don't have any issues with cables or anything like that signal wise. It's just some of the pedal placement doesn't make sense. It's hard to get to, or switches are really close. The power supply that I have on the board doesn't really work well for it. There's a few things that I just really need to tweak. A couple pedals, really one in particular that I'm going to get rid of, and get some new things to kind of replace some of the functionality that I've slowly lost over the past 6 months of just being dissatisfied with it and getting rid of gear. I'm notorious for swapping things in and out a lot, so I'm kind of keeping that in mind as I build this board. I'm going to have one section of it kind of made to be sort of modular that I can run, and I'll explain all of that kind of as I get to it. A couple pedals I'm really excited for that are coming in. I've got some stuff from Swindler and Walrus Audio that are coming in, and yeah, I think this is going to be a really good board. Coming off of one of my worst builds maybe ever, I'm really excited for the potential of this new board. So I'm going to walk you through it, kind of give you some practical tips and best practices for your pedal board. You don't have to take everything that I'm doing verbatim. You don't have to run your signal flow this way. This is particular to how I like to run my setup, but I think there's going to be stuff in here that will help you and just apply universally to good pedal board building. So here we go. So here's the board. I'm just going to kind of walk you through it, kind of walk you through how it's run and how I use it. So everything goes through this junction box, which is under the Ditto. It's a junction box that I built using Vertex Effects template, and basically I have it wired so that I can run my guitar into it, run to the effects loop of my amp, or use 4-cable method for my Kemper when I want to run my pedal board into that. So basically it's routed like this. It goes guitar in from the box, it goes here into the Cali 76. From the Cali 76, it goes into the Golden Boy, and we'll come back to that. Then it goes to the Walrus Audio Congra, then into the JHS Kilt, then it goes to the volume pedal, into the Ditto, and then out to the amp. So basically that's all run in the front of the amp, and then the L cap and the H9 are run into the back of the amp. So it's running through the effects loop essentially. So that's how it's set up, whether I'm running my amp or my Kemper typically. Sometimes I have it wired to where I can just go in to my board and it will run through everything and then out to my amp. So I don't have to use the effects loop, which is the great thing about the junction box. Now I also have this Analog Endeavors controller. This banks down and up presets on the H9. I also have a favorite switch here that is wired to the L cap to access the favorite on that. And then this fuzz button is the red remote for the JHS Kilt. Now in a different board iteration, I had all of that wired up. Right now, this is actually just controlling the H9. Part of that was I don't have TRS cables built that are long enough to reach the L cap, and the red remote, which just requires a regular 1/4-inch cable, will not quite reach the Kilt. So I need to redo that. And another thing is I have this One Spot Pro, the CS6, which is really great because it's flat. The problem with it is that since it's mounted on top of a board, it just doesn't really work that well for me. It takes up a lot of extra space this way, and there are other power supplies with more power that will actually take up less space that work better for this flat board setup. I'm also not super happy with the Golden Boy right now. I bought it thinking, at least in my mind, that it would be able to do a lot of things that I wanted it to do, having a boost and an overdrive in one pedal and the gain cycling, but I'm not totally sold on that, but more on that later. Alright, so it's been a few days since my last pedalboard update. I've since gotten a new power supply, gotten a couple of new pedals, and I've got a couple things on the way, but I have a pretty good idea of kind of what I'm going for now. Functionally, my last pedalboard was just kind of a hodgepodge. I just kind of threw it together to kind of get through some gigs and some sessions, and honestly, it just didn't really function like I wanted it to. Even just being at home for the most part the past few months and playing, I've realized that I was desperately in need of redoing it. So I'm gonna flip this around so you can go ahead and see what we are looking at. So this is basically the current state of affairs. So I've got this junction box built here. I'll explain that in a minute. But I'm going to be going into the Cali 76, into the Walrus Audio Congra, then going back into the Swindler Iron Drive, which is new and sounds killer. Then going into the JHS Kilt. I've got a pedal from Walrus Audio. I'm thinking that's going to be going here. Then out of that, volume pedal will then go to another pedal from Walrus that is in the mail on the way here. Pitchfork, and then it will run back into the junction box and go to the front of the amp. So essentially this is set up to be able to run 4-cable method, and so what I'm going to be doing with both my Kemper and my amp is having the wet effects in the effects loop, everything except for the chorus that will likely be going on here. But then it will essentially run from that. It will go into the L Capiston, out of the L Capiston into the H9, and then return to the junction box. I have swapped in a CS7 from the CS6 that I had, so it will have ample power. I'm going to be running the compressor at 18 volts, everything else at 9, and yeah, everything should work pretty well. The biggest thing that I found I was really missing on the board from the last time was my drive tone. I wasn't super happy with kind of the lower gain stuff. I was using the Jackson Audio Golden Boy for that, and it just wasn't doing it for me. So that's gone. A couple things from Walrus Audio coming in. I've got the Ages, their new overdrive, and the Julia that they're sending out. So I'm really excited to get those on the board and play with those. And yeah, we'll see how this goes. Alright, so things have changed a little bit. As you can see, I've since moved the H9 down. I had this arrangement at one point previously running this setup, and it just functions really well, having this to toggle the H9 and then having the Fave right next to the L cap and the red remote for the kilt all kind of on the lower row. So this is almost kind of where most of the control happens. A lot of this stuff like the compressor and then a lighter overdrive are typically on most of the time, so I'm not switching those as much. I actually decided to mount the iron drive on top of the junction box. As you can see, it's very stable. I have plenty of space in my case for it, so I don't have to worry about it, and it just allows me to get to that a little more easily over some of the other things. I also mounted the Electro Harmonics Pitchfork on top of the CS7, and the reason being, since the True Tone stuff are switching power supplies and not transformer based power supplies, anything that you mount on top won't have any noise, as opposed to the Voodoo Lab stuff, which is transformer based and similar. You have to be really careful mounting stuff on top because you can introduce noise. So right here is essentially going to be the end of the dry chain. I'm going to add the Walrus Audio Ages and the Julia here and still have some room to spare, and this is going to kind of be the modular section of the pedal board. So if I want to try something out or switch something out that's anything that I would have run in front of the amp, it can go there. And even if I decide I want to do something with wet effect, it would be pretty simple to reroute this since the return is going back into the junction box. So I still have some cables to build. It's kind of a mess right now. I still need to tighten up everything and get it organized, but yeah, we're coming along. Alright, so it's finally done. This is it. This is the new board. I'm really happy with it and the sound I'm getting out of it. There's a ton of functionality here from a really reasonable size. This board is a 24-inch by 12-inch flat board. and that is end to end, so that's including the metal. And I'm really happy with the way it turned out, both functionality wise and sound wise. So I'm just going to quickly kind of walk you through the signal chain, how I've got everything run, and then in the follow-up video to this, I'll take you through some sounds and kind of briefly demonstrate how I'm using each pedal. The iron drive has been a very worthy addition. This is now my favorite overdrive on the board, and the Ages is no slouch either. It's really great. The way I'm running it is a little different and kind of more utility, but I'll get to that in a minute. So, as explained, this under the iron drive is the junction box. You can see these kind of sends going back into it here, and I have this run so I can run my guitar into it and then out to my amp, or I can, and that would have everything running in front of the amp, or I have it set to where I can use the effects loop, and the L cap and the H9 are running in the effects loop of an amp or of my Kemper, kind of depending on the sounds I want. Sometimes I really like having reverb and delay in front of the amp, and they'll kind of naturally break up a little bit as the amp breaks up, but sometimes I want those really pristine studio clean tones, and so I will run them in the effects loop. So how I have this board run, it goes guitar into the junction box, out of the junction box it goes into the Cali 76, then into the Congra. Out of the Congra, it runs then into the iron drive. Out of the iron drive into the kilt. Kilt then goes into the volume pedal. Volume pedal then goes into the pitchfork. The pitchfork then goes into the Julia. And the Julia then goes into the Ages. And then it goes back into the front of the amp. Now the reason I have it run this way is so I can kind of get those 80s sort of chorus thickening effects if I want to have the option of either overdrive before the Julia, or I can have the Julia before an extra gain stage. This was really popular, so you don't really get that kind of clean chorus effect. It just makes your dirty tone sound thicker. And if I'm in a situation where maybe I'm not able to run my amp as dirty as I want by volume, then I can use the Ages to kind of push it a little harder and get sort of the same effect. This also allows me to run the Ages as just more of a boost if I want to kind of sculpt at the end of the chain. And this whole section right here, as I mentioned earlier, is kind of a modular part of the board. So all of this can easily be changed and swapped out as sort of the end of the dry chain. I'm pretty confident with the front end here, and even if I wanted to swap the Ages or a different fuzz in for the kilt or something, I would still be able to do that while having a lot of modular ability here at the end of the dry chain to kind of audition different pedals and that kind of thing without having to rewire the board. The space here is intentionally big enough for a larger pedal like an H9 or an L cap or something of that size, and I also have an extra spot here, so extra space to grow. Really happy with that. Part of the reason I have the pitchfork and the iron drive lifted practically for the iron drive being mounted on top of the junction box, it actually just makes it easier to get to because it's a little higher, and the same for the pitchfork. I will sometimes use this as a momentary latching kind of feature, so I will kick it on just for a momentary sort of thing, so it's important to have that easily accessible. Having this down here, again, as I mentioned before, worked really well on a previous board iteration for me, and I can control a lot just right here in this section. The only pedal on here that does presets, well, the only one that does multiple presets is the H9, so I can quickly toggle up and down on those. I also have the red remote wired to the kilt to flip the G2 toggle. Since I have the G1 toggle up, it sends it into gated to fuzz when I do that, and then the favorite switch for the L cap as well. And I just have that set as a kind of really wet multi-head tape sort of thing, and then I have set on the pedal either a dotted eighth or simple quarter delay. So that's basically it. That's how it works. I'm really happy with it. Stay tuned for part 2, where I'm going to be going through the signal chain and kind of doing a brief demo of how I use each pedal. If there's anything you want to see in that, leave me a comment below and let me know. If this video is helpful for you, give me a like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to be notified of new videos coming up. So thanks. See you next time.